counterintuitive way to figure out what you love based on how much difficult things or annoying things you do in order to do it. Like that's a really interesting way to show somebody their passion. I always tell authors, you have two audiences, the publisher and the person who buys the book. You're selling to both people. I'll use humor to exaggerate it so it's easy to see and it's easy to accept. Oh man, he's right. That's one of the things that I try to do with my books is I'm like, okay, how is the audience going to react to this? How's a corporate audience going to react to this? Have I seen a million books about overthinking? You know, have they had this position? What's my angle on it?
Hey, Chandler Bolt here, and joining me today, the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Jon Acuff. He's a New York Times best-selling author. He's written a bunch of books. 9 is the current count. By the time you're listening to this, there will probably be additional books added to that count. I feel like, so this is the second time we've had Jon on the show, and he's published 2 books since the last time, I think. And when we're talking before this interview, is already working on the next one. So I'm like, we can't even keep up with episodes. And that episode was probably a year and a half, 2 years ago.
Dude, I have a book coming out in September. Like there's a book already done coming out. Book number 10 is done. Like it's already locked and loaded, comes out in September. I'm talking about book number 11. That's the one I'm writing right now. So yeah, I want to be prolific. I decided, probably, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, I want to be a prolific, profitable writer. In that order.
Prolific, profitable writer.
Yeah,
okay.
In that order.
Now.
So,
okay.
I read a great book, Dickens and Prince, which was brilliant. One of my top 5 books from last year. And it compared the creative process of Charles Dickens and it was so fascinating. Prince at the time of his death had 5,000 to 7,000 produced songs in his vault. He could release a 10-song album every 6 months for something like 300 years. So and they said he was too prolific to worry about perfectionism. And that's a dope idea. So that's what I'm like, okay, how do I be prolific? If I want to be a prolific writer, then that takes certain things and I'm going to lean into that. And it means I can't do other things. So what happens for me is where I get trapped is I talk to dudes like some of our friends who aren't writers and they love running businesses. Like they're a CEO, they're an entrepreneur, and they hate writing. And they'll say to me like, why do you write so much? Like, ugh. And I'm thinking about them like, why do you have 400 employees, like mustaches and healthcare? Like that seems really hard. And so I think you always have to take advice from people who love the same things you love. Because if you're not careful, you'll take advice from people who hate what you love, and it'll
man, that's good. Dropping knowledge. We're not even into the intro yet, and we're dropping knowledge.
No, that's not. What are we waiting for? Why are we dillying or dallying? Let's just do it.
No time for the dilly dally. So I'll just quickly play, just so people know. I mean, Soundtracks is one of his recent books. Has just been absolutely killing it. His most recent book, beyond that, All It Takes Is a Goal. He's got a podcast called the All It Takes Is a Goal podcast. He's a speaker all over the place. Just incredible guy, really funny. I want to start with this. It's funny, you kind of beat me to the punch here because I literally had in my notes, question, how are you such a prolific content creator? It's like literally the word prolific is in there. And I guess that is what you're focused on. So how do you do it?
Well, I mean, I do it a number of different ways, but one is I always tell people I don't believe in writer's block. I believe in idea bankruptcy. If you can't write, it just means your idea bank is empty. So I'm really deliberate about collecting ideas. Like I'm really deliberate. So I'll give you an example. Last week, I had coffee with Greg Sankey, the SEC commissioner. So the commissioner of SEC football, brilliant guy. And he's 12 years ahead of me in life. And so I was there to take a bunch of notes, but he mentioned in our conversation that his wife challenged him one time and was like, why don't you make a list of the executives you want to go learn from and then just approach them and ask if you can come. And so he started to do that. And he'll find somebody and go, they're in an industry I'm not in. They have a knowledge I don't have. And he'll just reach out and connect and go, hey, can I fly out to where you are and spend 60 minutes asking you questions? And he's taking notes. Like he'll send me things he took from our coffee and go, hey, here's 3 things that I took away from that idea. That's the kind of learner I want to be. So I think a lot of writing is being willing to learn. The other day I spoke at an event and the sales director said in his speech, hey, remember guys, these are the commitments we made. He didn't use the word target because target isn't as hardcore. He said,
Mm-hmm.
these are our
Mm-hmm.
commitments. These are the
Mm-hmm.
commitments we made for our sales this year. Like, and I wrote that down. I was like, oh, he was really deliberate to use the word commitment. That's
Mm-hmm.
fascinating. Or I'll write down like business days is a funny way to say days. Like if I was going to write a sentence someday, maybe a year from now, and I wanted to be like, it took me 9 days to do that. It would be funnier to go, it took 9 business days to accomplish that. Like that one word makes the idea funnier. And so I'm collecting. And then a lot of it is like I write by hand. So I write like long form by hand because I feel it's easier for me to be kind of loose when it's
Are you
paper.
talking like pen and paper? You're
Pen and
talking,
paper. Yeah, pen and
you're
paper. And
kidding.
no, so I write. And then when I type it into the computer, that's the first edit. So as I'm reading it, I'm like,
Oh,
that wasn't a good enough sentence. Nah, like, so I'm just trying to get the idea down in that first round. The words aren't right. The words won't be right for a long time. But if I can capture the idea, then I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Or I'll go, nah, I took a long time to get there. Why don't I say it a different way? And so, yeah, like I write, like today I wrote some for the new book and it was in my journal and I was writing in the journal and I was
okay.
writing. And then eventually at another time, I'll take that journal, open it up and type it in, but I'll be translating it into a second draft just from doing that. Because for me, it's harder for me to have creative freedom in a computer than it is a notebook. I can cross it off. It just feels different.
So hold up. You write your books by hand.
Yeah, yeah. And then I type them in and then I mean, like if I showed you, like, I'll show you a notebook right now. I mean, some people see this on video, but like here, this is like this, this, and it says at the top book, like the word it says at the top is book. And then like, here's some more. And like, like here's some more. So like, yeah, that's how I'm doing it. And I'll go, okay, what's the topic I want to talk about, think about. And then as I put it into the document, it gets better, it gets better, it gets better. But I even like I edit by paper. So when I've got it in there and it's a second or third
You
round,
print it
I
out.
print it out, I'm marking it up. That's just easier for me. So I'm pretty old school that way. Now that I say it out loud, like, yeah, that is, I feel like I'm carving things in wood with my process. But I would
So
say, like, if somebody said to me, but that's so slow, I'd go, oh, I'm sorry. Have you written 10 books? Because like like if you've written 100, I'll hear that feedback. But if you haven't written at least 10, it's not slow. It's actually turns out to be really fast for the way I write.
It's what's the Chinese proverbs? What is it? Slow is smooth and smooth is fast.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, that's what I mean. For me, it works.
So are you writing full pages handwritten, or is it kind of like bullet point story?
No, full pages. I'm doing everything. First, like, I'll draw it.
I just can't get over this.
Yeah. No, dude, like I'll draw it. Most of the time when I'm trying to figure out the idea, I draw it. I sketch it out. I'm like, this piece plus this piece, it's shapes. It's like, what happens when this happens? And so I'm kind of trying to sketch out the idea. Like, so like with soundtracks, I'm like, okay, well, when people have thoughts, how should they process them? What does that look? And if I can sketch it out, it's usually a strong enough idea. Like if I can't do a simple sketch, it's too complicated and it's going to be complicated for the reader. So then when what I'll do is I'll give myself assignments. So I'll say, today I'm going to write about the Porsche story and see where that goes. Like I'm going to see where that goes because I think it goes somewhere interesting. And I know the key things I want to cover. I want to cover this Porsche I saw or this conversation I had or whatever it is. And so I have some of the highlights that I'm going to write about in my note, and then I'll write it, but it'll always go better places than I could have planned. Cause that's what writing does is new ideas show up in the moment.
So you're saying, hey, I've got my idea bank. I love that quote of, I don't believe in writer's block. I believe in idea bankruptcy. So is that in a note on your phone somewhere or something? And just as you come up with stuff and you've got kind of the idea bank.
Yeah. So like I know, and I've done it a bunch of different ways. I usually just go through seasons where I'm like, it's all notebook, but that's a hassle. I sometimes will lose ideas and I'm like, okay, let me put them in my phone. But like, I'm looking at my phone right now and like, okay. So like this one says, add to the essay about that you wrote that you should feel overwhelmed. So I'm writing a book about anxiety right now. And one of my concepts is, yeah, we should feel anxious. We as a culture have decided I never want to feel sad or anxious or anything. And the second I do? Something must be wrong and I have to fix it immediately. And like, no, that's one of the human emotions. Like you should be okay to have that one, to expect that one. So like that note will help me. And I said like, okay, remember the conversation you had with Chip about this, or like, what are you this one just says book, what are you willing to put up with? Because I think it's a really interesting idea. Everybody always goes like, find your passion, find your passion. But I think the reverse is interesting too, where what will you be willing to do? Like what amount of suck will you be willing to do? Because that often points to what you love. So like as I walk through an airport and it's a delayed flight and I had to spend the night in Milwaukee and I don't have clean clothes and like whatever it is, I'm still like, this is amazing because I got to speak for 45 minutes at an event. So there's other things like when I'm doing digital marketing, the slightest inconvenience, I'm like, I hate it. This is so dumb. I don't want to do this. Other people have the reverse. They're like, I love trying to figure out the algorithm. That's something they care about. So I wrote down that idea because it's like, I don't know the idea yet. It's not formed, but I have this sneaking suspicion there's this kind of counterintuitive way to figure out what you love based on how much difficult things or annoying things you do in order to do it. Like that's a really interesting way to show somebody their passion that I haven't heard somebody talk about. Like I haven't seen a lot of books go, figure out what suck you put up with and then you'll know. Like so that's what I'm taking notes on is little thing, but it could be a word choice like business days.
Got it. So we've got the idea backlog or the idea bank in your phone.
Yep.
Then you're pulling from that, and it sounds like creating kind of, okay, I'm sketching it out because if I can't sketch it out simply, then it's I probably haven't nailed the idea.
Yeah.
Then it sounds like maybe from there, writing it out analog style. And then, okay, that's fleshing out the content of the book. And then you said, as you enter it into the Word doc, then that's, all right, that's almost like your first edit where you're making it better. And then once you've got the book in the actual doc, printing it out so that you can mark it up kind of like high school English paper style.
Yeah, but like there's a lot that happens between the handwritten and the typed in because what'll happen is I'll go, wow, this paragraph made a huge assumption that you didn't explain. So like I realize I'll find as I'm typing it, wait a second, you just left half the readers back
business days. What is that?
And so I'll have to go, oh, it needs a paragraph. Or and this sounds so woo-woo, and I'm not like a woo-woo guy, but like I'm getting better at listening to my body. So I used to write past where I was writing well. Like I would write and go like, you just got to write. But now like I can recognize, oh, I'm making a lot of typos. I just took a lazy shortcut. Oh, like it's my body going, hey, we're tired. Like we've written enough today, or we need a break and a reset. And so sometimes in the handwritten version, I'll go, oh, I must have been tired. I took I ended it in a cheesy way because I couldn't figure out the real ending. And I was like, and then read the next paragraph. I'm like, that's good. Like, no, that's a shortcut. That's not good. And so a lot happens in that edit. And then I'll send chunks of the book right now, as we talk, I know in a couple weeks, I'm going to send 10 to 15,000 words to my editor. And the key there is I had a call with first. So I came up with a list of things I wanted to talk about. Here's where I'm going. Here's why I'm doing it. So then I pitched them, hey, just so you know, this is where I'm headed. This is why I'm excited. These are the steps. This is like, it's got, I'm deliberate about it. I'm working through it. And so I'm pitching him on the idea before he gets to 10 to 15 so that when he gets it, he goes, oh yeah, this is the thing he said he was going to do. And he did it. He figured it out. Or the key, one of the smartest things I've ever accidentally done is add a letter to chunks of copy I send. And I really didn't come up with it. When I say accidentally, I just saw somebody do it. I have this editor, Brian, and he would send me a letter explaining what he's sending. And it would be like 5 points. And dude, that is magic. Because what happens is you go, hey, editor, I want you to pay special attention to this. I really tried to balance the examples I was using. I felt like it was getting too many men and not enough female or whatever. Or I want you to pay attention to this story. Or, hey, I sent you a 7-point list. 2 of them aren't strong. I can't figure out which are the 2. So would you please, in this list that I've written about, in chapter 4, take out your 2 weakest. Like, let me know what you think are your 2 weakest. And so I'm explaining it and it goes so much smoother versus just, hey, here's a chunk. You figure this out. Like that doesn't help. I constantly look at this as sales. Like you're constantly selling the idea and you want the editor to have the easiest job possible where they go, oh, I can see exactly where they're going. Like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And you also want them to know you worked hard. That's the thing. Like so much of life, if I spend 30
Why does
minutes
that matter for your editor?
because then they know what you put into it. Then they go,
Okay.
oh, they're really into this. Like the danger of being prolific is people can think you're writing quickly and casually, and they go, oh, like it's here comes some more ideas. It matters because then they can tell you're all in. Like you're the champion of this idea. Like you have to be all in. And it's kind of like the little things you start to notice with successful people, that like what they do. Like when you go to a meeting with them, they have a page of notes already. They've already had some thoughts they've been thinking about. They don't show up and try to wing it because they're charismatic. When I sit down with somebody and they go, hey, I was really looking forward to this. I've already written down 5 questions I want to ask you. Here's the questions. That's a different experience than if somebody just shows up and wings it. So I'm always trying to go, I'm not going to wing this thing that's precious, which is writing a book. So if I can write a dope 5-point letter about it and go, hey, here's why I did it. This is where, like, then it tells them it's another one of those signs. It's kind of like that old story of like Van Halen and the green M&Ms. They only did that so that they knew you took their contract seriously and read the whole thing. Like, and it's another one of those signs of like, okay. And it's my job. I like that. I want to be a professional writer. And that's what a professional does. Like a professional doesn't send a bunch of loose copy and go, you figure out.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I like the concept. I guess I'm trying to understand in the context of sending that to your editor, is that more so you feel like it gives them the overarching thing of what you're looking for them to zoom in on? Is it more so you feel like they respect the process and then now they're putting more into it when they're editing? Like
it makes their job easier and they can edit faster. They dial in right away. Like kind of like, I mean, it's like a movie trailer. Like, why do we like movie trailers? It gets them excited about the content. We were like, dude, there's a thing I stumbled on. I think you're going to love this part. I can't wait to hear. Like, why do we have movie trailers? You could go, you don't just see the whole movie. Like, no, like the movie trailer. I always tell authors, you have 2 audiences, the publisher and the person who buys the book. You're selling to both people. And so like it's like when something good happens related to the book, I email the publisher because they didn't see it and they're not supposed to. It's my job. So if I go sign, like Monday, I signed 365 copies of soundtracks. I posted that on social media as a thank you, like so fun that the client did this, bought copies for everybody. And then I emailed the team and said, hey, just wanted you to know I'm in Miami. It's early in the morning, whatever. I'm out here signing books. The book's doing great. Like people are loving it. Thank you for creating an amazing product with me. I really appreciate it. That book came out 3 years ago. Those are those little things that like when people go, I want to do what you do. I'm like, by all means, I think it's the best job in the world. There's a lot of stuff, dude. There's a lot of stuff. So, and it keeps like, and again, it's another way for me to have gratitude to say like, man, look how this cover is popping. Like you guys killed the cover, and it's 3 years later. And like, it's another way for me to have gratitude to the publisher.
In some ways, it's like, I think you want to be where I'm at. Maybe not do what I've done. It's you're like, hey, I want to be you.
Yeah.
Let me, gosh, I got like 7 follow-up questions on this. And I got one follow-up question from like minute 3 of the interview. Greg Sankey, SEC commissioner, he reached out to you. Did you reach out to him? Was this what you were saying?
He read one of my books. One of my books. He's a learner. He's a consummate learner. So he read Do-Over. Like this is going to sound so braggy. This is going to sound so braggy. He carries a card in his pocket. He carries a card in his pocket with his 4 favorite books on it. And then there's a 5th one with a blank line. And one of his 4, and he gives it to players. So like you play for Florida, you play for like Florida, you play for Georgia, and he mentors you a little bit. He'll go, hey, you got to read these books. And he has a card. And one of the books on the card is Do-Over by Jon Acuff. So he really enjoyed Do-Over. And so that's how we connected. And he was like, man, and then a cool moment that was just straight up God. It had nothing to do with me. He wrote me a handwritten thank you note for being on my podcast. And he sent it the week Texas and Oklahoma joined the SEC, kind of a big week in the SEC. And that was him. And I told my wife, I was like, can you imagine a dude at his level still sends thank you notes? And she goes, oh, you got it backwards. He's at that level because he sends thank you notes. And I was like, oh. And so I told that story at Global Leadership Summit. And then I get off stage and go, Greg Sankey is 4 rows in. He's sitting right there. He heard that story. So I got to honor him about that in front of thousands and thousands of people. So that was just cool. So we've become friends over the years, just like with text. He lives in Birmingham. I'm in Nashville. So if one of us goes through the city, Absolutely. He's just one of those guys. Again, I'm constantly thinking about what do people who have sustained long-term success do? Because like I'm
Hmm.
no longer interested in
Hmm.
the man or woman who has like a YouTube channel that blows up for a year, or like
Hmm.
somebody has one hot book and then you never hear from them again. I'm really fascinated by people that are on a 20 or 30-year run.
Hmm.
That's the hardest thing. Like I
Hmm.
look at a guy like Craig Groeschel and I'm like, that he's still doing the thing at a high
Hmm.
level, or Greg Sankey, you're still doing the thing at the high
Yeah.
level. What are they consistently doing? And it seems like one of
Prolific.
the things is they learn from other people.
Hmm.
And my wife challenged me on that last night. She was like, you're 12 years younger than Greg. Name the people 12 years younger than you that you're learning from. And I was like, ooh. Like I had to like,
Dang,
like
your wife is just killing it, man.
yeah,
She's just like boom, boom,
yeah,
boom.
she's the best. She's the best. And so like, and she was right. And so now I'm on this mission. I'm like, okay, who are these like mid 30s folks that I can talk to and learn from? Cause they know so many things I don't know. Like, how do I connect with them? So that's what's fun to me about this job is you do get to meet people like and ask them questions.
Man, we got to bring Miss Acuff on the podcast.
She
Living with
is,
a writer, all
yeah,
of the things that John
yeah.
gets credit for
Oh, dude.
that I
Yeah.
don't
Yeah, dude. You're not cute. You know what she said last night? This is just us on the porch. She goes, social media is like you're a serf, you're a peasant back in like medieval times. And I was like, what do you mean? She goes, well, you don't own the land that you're working on. They can kick you off the land anytime they want, and you exist only for the king's pleasure, the algorithm. So you are a peasant. Like it's fun to think. I'm building
Wow.
my YouTube
Holy
empire.
cow.
They can breathe and you're gone. I'm
Hmm.
building my Instagram empire. They can breathe and you're gone. You own nothing. You are a social media serf. And I was like, oh, I've never thought about it that way. You better believe I'm gonna like slide that into a book somewhere. And
Oh
if I
yeah.
put my wife said every time a story I was sharing was something she came up with, it would be 1,000 times. So yeah, I give her as much credit as I can. She's brilliant and hilarious.
That's awesome. I hope you're loving this episode so far. So if you're serious about writing and publishing your book, we would love to chat with you and help create a custom plan. All right. So all you need to do right now is go to selfpublishing.com/schedule. Schedule a 45-minute consultation with one of the experts on my team. All right. Let's implement what you're learning in this episode and let's see how we can help with your book. Go to selfpublishing.com/schedule. What the fifth slot on the card is that for?
That's for a current book. So he's like, something he's reading then. So he might like, he loved Strength to Strength. I gave him this book, Strength to Strength by Albert Brooke. That's the other thing I find like people that I look up to do. They trade books. They give books to each other. They're like, hey, they're consummate learners. So yeah, he might go, okay, this is a current book that I'm reading that I wanted to, that I'm interested in. So yeah, he's just doing a million things like that. I saw him at the SEC basketball tournament. I went and I mentioned thank you notes and he had a stack of them in his pocket. So during timeouts, he's over there on the sideline writing thank you notes. And I'm like, this guy is doing it, dude. He's doing
You're
the
kidding.
thing. Yeah.
It's very impressive. It's very, very, very impressive what he's done with SEC. I mean, I'm a Clemson guy, so ACC, so naturally I have like kind of a little bit of disdain for him and that conference, but you can't help but respect it. I mean, it's incredible.
They're on a different level. They're like the Taylor Swift of football conferences right now. They're at a different level. Like them and the Big Ten are just doing things differently. Like,
it's impressive. Hey, how are you so funny? Like, I know this is like, you probably this is not like a just thing that you can say on a podcast, but like as it relates to your creative process, I think something that makes you really unique is I'll see something on Twitter or LinkedIn or what, and I'm doubled over. I mean, fiance's like, what are you laughing at? I'm like, oh, this Jon Acuff thing. Like, it's so funny.
Thanks, man.
Like, what is there any, like, what is your process for coming up with quippy, funny things like that?
I'd say I usually add it later. So like I first get the idea. I just want the bare bones idea. So the bare bones idea might be, I think if you looked at the list of things you do that suck in order to do the good thing, you might realize how much you love the good. That's the idea. Those aren't the right words. And then then I'll write it out and then I'll go, how can this be funny? How could this be enjoyable? What's a funny story about this? Like, dude, I put a story in the new book. So we did a teen version of All It Takes Is a Goal. So after Soundtracks came out, a bunch of parents were like, do you have a teen version of Soundtracks? We didn't. My two daughters helped me write one. So we're doing another teen version of of my books, All It Takes Is a Goal, I put a story in there that I'd never put into a book about when I was a ninth grader. My biology teacher said if we found a road-killed animal and got bugs to eat all the whatever flesh off and then rebuilt the skeleton, he would give us bonus point. And I was failing biology, and I was like, that sounds easier than studying. I should fry. So, dude, for like a month, every time I was driving, I didn't have a license. I'd tell my parents, pull over. I think there's a dead animal. I finally found one. I couldn't tell what it was because it's so smushed. And then I put it in a Tupperware in my backyard, forgot about it. It rained. It like eventually was just this like disgusting stew. And the absurdity of me thinking, probably rebuild a skeleton of an animal. I could probably do that pretty. How hard can that be? Like it was insane that I even entertained that for a second. Never mind, looked for dead animals for a month. And so like that's a story that I know in a book will be really funny. It'll serve the illustration I'm trying to make. And so like that's the kind of thing I'm doing. Or I try to like part of my humor is like I'm trying to guess what people are thinking so I can make a joke of it. And so like I'm going, okay, they're going to be thinking this, and I want to be in on the conversation too. So if I say this, they'll be surprised. And then like, dude, some of it is I use the humor to say things that would be hard to hear otherwise. So like, I'll give you an example of that, of how I do that style. I'm a very negative person by nature, but I practice positivity. And sometimes people are surprised by that. And I tell them about all the things I do to be positive because the ROI on positivity is better than the ROI on negativity. And then I'll go and I'll meet people sometimes. They'll say, oh, I'm negative. And I'll say, well, tell me about your day. And they'll be like, well, I drove home from work, and on the drive home, I listened to a podcast called Brutal Unsolved Crimes in the City You Live In. And then I fell asleep that night to a documentary called People Who Look Like You Getting Murdered. It's a new special on Netflix. It's weird that I feel negative. I'm like, it's not weird. It's not weird at all. Like you fed yourself, like you watched the Jeffrey Dahmer documentary about somebody who ate humans. Like, don't then go, I had the weirdest dreams last night. I don't know what could it be. Like, of course you're practicing negativity. Like you're guzzling negativity. And so that might be hard to hear unless I exaggerate it with humor. Like clearly there's no podcast called Brutal Unsolved Crimes in Your City, but we all know where, like, I'm making fun of kind of a meme of like, on today's podcast episode, we found somebody who got their throat, and the cops did nothing. Listen to this podcast. And you're like, it's pretty negative. Like, so at the end of the story, the throat cutter's just out there cutting through. Like, that sounds bad. So I'll use humor to exaggerate it so it's easy to see and it's easy to accept. Oh man, he's right. Like I wouldn't do that. Like, why do I do that? Like, why am I okay with that? Like, oh, okay, that's, or like I have this line in one of my speeches that says, you're the most persuasive person you've ever met. And that's a good line because it's counterintuitive. Like the idea of you're meeting you, but you are the most persuasive person you've ever met because every bad decision you've ever done, first you talked yourself into it. First you were like, we should do that. That's going to work out. That'll be great. And so I joke about that. And then I say, like, have you ever eaten a whole snack bag of something and then realized at the end of it that it said share size on it on the outside? I did not. I shared that with me. Or like party size, party of one. You're like, and that's a human experience that I'm joking about. Or then I'll go, have you ever stayed up later than you wanted to because you told yourself, I'll watch one Instagram video, one YouTube video? And everybody's done that. And I'll go, and then I'll tell a true story myself. I'll say, a couple of weeks ago, I stayed up till 1 a.m. watching videos about Singapore's #1 stingray breeder. And I'll go, I'm not even in the market for a manta ray. And that's a funny statement. Like, I'm not in the market for a manta ray. No one's ever seen those words together in the same sentence. And they go, and like, that's a funny, and so like that, but again, I'm exaggerating the point of like, we talked ourselves into staying up to 1 a.m. If I say it that way, like that's clinical, it's boring. But if I say like, I'm not even in the market for a manta ray, like that, like people are like, yeah, like, why did you watch that? Why were you like, gotta figure out what this guy's doing with these stingrays? How is he breeding them so successfully? It's gotta be a difficult process, like whatever, like they can start laughing along with me. That's how I use humor.
Got it. Have you ever done comedy or improv or anything like that?
Yeah, I did two. It was awesome. It was super fun. I did 2 nights at Zany's, sold out. Zany's is the largest comedy club in Nashville. And that was, I guess, maybe about 5 years ago. Super fun, super hard. Gave me great respect, even more. I already
And that was just a
respect.
one-off?
Yeah, I just did. I just wanted to try it, see if I could do it. And
Okay.
and they sold out in 24 hours. It was awesome. A bunch of people came out for it. But it gave me even more respect for comedians, and I already have a ton of respect. I already have like immense respect for them, but it's super hard because in a speech there's highs and lows. In comedy, it's mostly highs. So like in a speech, I'm like, we're ramping up. It's a funny joke. Here's a story about something that's kind of serious. We're
Oh,
ramping up. Here's
yeah.
a funny. With comedy, it's go,
It's
go,
got
go,
to
go,
be
go. Yeah,
hitting.
it's
Yeah.
go, go,
Funny,
go, go,
funny,
go.
funny, funny. Yeah.
And so that was a super. It took me 3 months to write 60 minutes. Easy.
Oh,
Easy.
wow. You alluded to this before our interview. You said you're kind of getting back to your roots and in a writing style that only you can do. And so I think this weaves together a couple questions that I had for you, which was A, why do you think Soundtracks has done so well? And it kind of weaves in some of the humor stuff. But it seems like that book's done really well. You said before the interview, like, hey, I feel like I was a little too just clinical. And maybe that's not the word that you use, but just like kind of straightforward
some
stuff.
books I can be straightforward, and if I'm not careful, I can be really practical. And so that's where the humor is helpful for me. So, is your question, how do I like,
well, why do you think Soundtracks sold so well? And does that relate to how you kind of mentioned to me before the interview started, like you're getting back to who you feel like is uniquely you, like writing style wise?
Yeah, I think the challenge for writers is we always talk about finding our voice. We don't talk enough about keeping our voice. And so like it's not finding it is not as hard to me as keeping it. Your voice is very slippery. Like, cause you'll get feedback and then you'll be like, well, I guess I could like, or hey, people really like this. And then I could, and then like, it's hard to keep it. So for me, that's always the tension is like, how do I keep it? How do I not write Gary Vee's next? Because I read Gary Vee's book and he's really bombastic. And how do I not like, you're constantly trying to not put on somebody else's voice. That's the challenge for me as a writer. And so I think part of the reason Soundtracks was the timing. The timing was accidental. I can't take any credit of that. It came out. It wasn't easy to tour on it, obviously, because it was the pandemic, but it came out at a time where everybody was overthinking. 2020 was catnip for overthinking. So if you weren't before, the other thing that worked for Soundtracks is that the title worked really, really well. Because if I had named it Voices, no dude would buy it. If I named it Inner Voices, no dude would pick that book up. Like, there's no way. Like, people go, nah, like, but Soundtracks is very, like, everybody can go, oh yeah, I do have a soundtrack. Oh yeah, it makes sense. Like, it's a really approachable word. So I think that's one of the things that I try to do with my books is I'm like, okay, how is the audience going to react to this? How's a corporate audience going to react to this? Have I seen a million books about overthinking, or have they had this position? What's my angle on it? Like the book I'm writing right now about anxiety, my angle is going to be like, it's great. Like you can do great. You can do great things with it. Cause most books are like, you can end it. The right 4 steps, you can end it. I'm like, no, you can't. Like, you can't stop it. And why? Like, it's allowed me, all I've done is figured out how to channel my anxiety into creativity. And now I have 10 books and I'm going to have 10 more because I'm a very anxious person. And that'll be a really interesting hook, I hope, because I think sometimes when you've written a couple books, people think you've got it all together. And so I think when I go like, I do not, here's an anxious situation. I think people will get a kick out of that and will see themselves and are willing. I try to write books people, can't say no to. So if I say to people, I wrote a book called Finish. It's about perfectionism. Like, is it ever hard for you to finish the things you start? Who says no to that? Nobody goes, no, I'm 100 for 100. I've never started a hobby and stopped it. No, what are you talking about? If I say, I wrote a book about overthinking. Do you ever overthink? Nobody goes, really? I don't. I use exactly the right amount of thoughts. And my spouse does too. No, instead they go, oh, I need that book, or my husband needs that book. My wife needs that book. So that's when I know I've got a good topic. And I think anxiety and bravery are going to be an interesting, because I think the world's only getting more anxious. So I don't know when people will ever not need, like, I think that it's just gonna, same with overthinking. I think they'll continue to need it.
That's good. It's a great hook, great topic. And guys, if you want to listen, you can go back to episode 98. We did a full breakdown on the behind the scenes of the launch of Soundtracks. Yeah. We talked about launching the book using a challenge. Like, there's a bunch of good stuff there. I'm going to go lightning round with a few questions, Jon, before we wrap up. I guess first off, why are you still traditionally publishing? Like, are you just getting fat advances and just like big book deals, or what's the why behind that?
Yeah. It's the advances work very well. I would say the other reason is I really like the team. Like I love the team. The team I have at Baker is fantastic. Like the team I had at Penguin was awesome too. So I've been fortunate to be with teams. Like it'd be one thing if I was able to say, well, you know what? Here's the thing. I've been burned a couple times, publishing, whatever. I can't say that. I've got great teams that are quick, that challenge me, that make me better, and are fast. Like an example of that would be, so Soundtracks comes out. We have all these parents go, hey, do you have a teen version? And Baker reacts. We get a new
Cool.
product out pretty quickly. Like they weren't like, hey, yeah, in 4 years, like they were like, no, let's capture this momentum. Let's do it. Here's what we can do. So it's funny. I almost feel bad when I talk to other authors because they'll go, man, my publisher's the worst. They're so, and I go, oh man, that sounds terrible. And I'm like, man, but also I'm maintaining that relationship too.
Right.
Like
Right.
I'm not there to be served. That's one of the lessons I mean, I keep learning lessons about ego in my own life. And one of the things is like, if I don't show up as the talent, but I show up to serve, it's a lot better relationship. Same with like public speaking changed for me when I went from being a performer into somebody serving. Like I'm serving the audience. Like I'm there 1 hour. The event planner is there all year. I want her to look like a rock star. I tell them before I speak, my three goals: one, your phone blows up during the talk. I want you getting text messages from your boss that says, hey, Sheila, this is way to put on this event. This keynote is exactly what we needed. Number
Cool.
two, I want the audience to go, he understands me at taking the time. Audiences can tell when a speaker shows up with one speech and gives it, whether you're a mom blogger or a plumber. And then three, the one that I really like is I want the sound team to be engaged. Because if I can make the jaded dude who runs the board at the JW Marriott, who's heard every speech and seen every PowerPoint, if I can make that guy laugh and lean in, the rest of the audience is dying. Like, so
Oh,
I am
interesting.
always like, so I know, like I stepped off the stage at an event the other day and the sound guy was like, I bought your book while you're talking, man. I can't wait to read it. Then I know, like, okay, if the guy who's working the event goes, wait a sec, I got to figure out these soundtracks. I got some of those. Like, then I know the rest of the audience who's an attendee is having a super fun time and I've served them well.
Cool. I like that. So making the event planner look good, feels like I'm talking to them and isn't just a Ken talk and then the sound guy's engaged. Are you on the speaking side of things? Are you basically every new book, are you creating a new talk?
Yep.
And
Yep.
that is
Multiple
what you're
talks.
kind of going
Multiple
around?
talks. Yeah. So, I mean, I gave a soundtracks talk twice this week, and that book came out 4 years ago. From a nonfiction perspective, I don't know how any human sells books without speaking gig. Selling books is hard, dude. Like it's hard. There's so many books. People are super distracted. Like it's hard. And so for me, the two work really well together. And I feel really fortunate that I meet some other authors that understandably like, I don't want to be on stage. It doesn't make me comfortable. And I love it. It's so fun to me. So yeah, I usually do 1 to 2 keynotes per book.
Okay. 1 to 2 keynotes that you'll create per book.
Yep.
What, how many times are you speaking a year typically?
40 to 50.
40 to 50. And are those gigs mostly coming inbound or they mostly come like how do you book most of those gigs?
Well, I have a form on my website. So there are people that fill out like an availability form. But I have a speakers bureau I've worked with for 10 years here in Nashville where I am. So a lot of them come through there, or relationships. Somebody will see me at a different event and then book, like the one I did, one of the ones I did this week, they said, oh, we saw you at this other event 2 years ago. And so sometimes it's compounding that way. Like the more you're out there, the more you're out there.
That makes sense. And is it mostly corporate?
I would say 97% corporate and then maybe 3% church. Like I'll speak for my church once a year or once every other year, but it's 97% corporate.
Okay. And is that the main, I'm assuming that's the main business model is on the speaking side of things. You've got some online stuff and then the books.
Yeah.
That's kind of like, that's the model.
Well, think about it this way. Like at this point, I'm 12 years in, 13, 14 years into speaking. So I'm very aware that anyone can start an online something tomorrow. Anyone, but they can't have Range Rover them to speak debut of their new vehicle. They can't be like, hey, Range Rover, why don't you go ahead? I'm going to at that event followed Wyclef Jean. So like you can't, like if you were like, I want to be a speaker, I'm just going to call up Range Rover and be like, hey, like that relationship was the byproduct 10 years of doing the stuff. Like, and so I'm aware that in the same way that I use humor, because I think a lot of people don't. And so like, I know I'll never out research Jim Collins. He's amazing at that. But like, there's a lot of people that I can be really funny. And then same with speaking at this point, because I've been doing it so long, there's definitely a ton of people that do it. Don't get me wrong, but it's a harder road. It's a steeper climb. If you were like, well, I want to do exactly that, like, amen, go for it. Where like some of the online stuff I do, it's so anyone can sell anything, even like, like you can be writing a parenting book and you have a toddler and you're like, all you've done so far is protect. Like when you have a 2-year-old, you haven't even parented yet. You've protected. And like now that I've got an 18-year-old and a 20-year-old, I might feel kind of comfortable writing a parenting book because I'm like, oh man, like we're not perfect. I'm not an expert by any means, but man, I got 2 decades to talk about what we did deliberately, what things work, what things didn't. Maybe I'll write that. But the challenge with like online stuff is like anybody can, pop up and be like, I'm an expert in this. And then like I had a professor tell me, it was so fascinating the way he said it. And I wrote it down in my idea notes. He said, there's a lot of people who feel imposter syndrome, and that's because they should. He said they are. He said because they are imposters. So, and that opened me up to, oh, he's right. He's right. Some people should feel that. That's appropriate. You're selling something you're not qualified to sell or do. That's actually your heart. That's not imposter syndrome. That's your heart going, hey, I don't know if we should take that money from that person. We don't know what we're doing. Like, I don't like, what do we, and you'll see people sell that. They'll go, just look up what's trending, create a product. And like, you're not an expert at that. And even if you can't sell it, it's going to be quick. It's not so sometimes it's again, like I like to grow my brand over time, like where there's a lot of things I have to say no to because I'm like, it's outside of what I do. I wouldn't feel good about that. It's not what I like to talk about just because I could make a little money off it. I think it would dent the brand more than it would help the brand. Like, so I think that's part of why I love public speaking is that I've spent a long time doing it and I wanted even longer. The crazy thing is people tell me, they'll be like, man, you got to get off the road. Like it's high. This is the phrase people tell me all the time. They're like, it's high paid manual labor. Like you got to get off the road, which is like, if I said to your brother, man, you got to stop playing live concerts. You got to stop going to Red Rocks, man. If you could just stay home and never like, obviously the road is challenging in its own way, but the whole point of a musician learning the guitar was to play in front of people. That was the joy. So like, I don't want to get off the stage. I like, yeah, like nobody's like, oh man, I can't wait to go through the Baltimore airport or whatever. Man, I love doing it. Like that's not, I don't like the idea of like, oh, you should get off the road. Like, no, I'm having a blast, dude. I want to do it like with the right clients. I don't do 100 events a year. I'm like, I know my limits. Like I'm pretty serious about like, that's too many gigs. So it's not, for me, I always think about that. Like, but that's why I love speaking. There's so many reasons that I think it's a really fun business model.
That's cool, man. That's really cool. Well, I got dozens more questions, but we'll save them for next time.
Yeah, third episode.
Maybe 2 years from now, you probably have published a couple more books.
I'm trying. I'm out here.
Maybe we have Miss Acuff on the show by then. What's that?
You published like 900 this week. You're telling me I'm prolific. Chandler Bolton team are just getting books out into the world.
Oh, man. Well, Jon, where can people go to find out more about you, to buy your books, all the stuff?
So the books are available anywhere books are sold. The latest one is All It Takes to Goal, and I read the audiobook, and it's got 10 bonus stories. There's a free add bonus stories to your audiobook if you get record one, because a lot of times people buy both versions, and that's a really fun way to super serve. So I wrote 10 separate stories that are only in the audiobook. Podcast is All It Takes to Goal, and website's jonacuff.com, and I'm Jon Acuff on Twitter and Instagram and all this stuff.
And follow him if you want to laugh.
Yeah. High bar.
And learn all at the same time.
Trying. I'm out here. I'm dancing. I'm tap dancing out here, Chandler. Babies.
Or on LinkedIn, if you want to see videos of him on a walk or on a run.
Yeah. You'll get to see my neighborhood. If you want to see a very normal suburban neighborhood and a sweaty man yelling at a camera, that's me. That's me.
Oh, Jon, you're the man. Thank you.
Thanks, buddy.
Thank you so much for watching or listening to this episode of the Self-Publishing School podcast. I know there's so many places that you can be spending your time. There's other podcasts that you could be listening to, YouTube channels that you could be watching. So thank you so much. It means the world. Now, I want you to do 3 things right now if you found this episode helpful. I don't know if you know this, but we've got a YouTube channel. It's a companion channel to this podcast. All the video versions of the episode are on the YouTube channel. So number one, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Number two, if you're listening to this podcast wherever, whether this is Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Number two, I want you to subscribe to this podcast right now so you don't miss a future episode. And then number three, this is probably the most important, leave a review on the podcast. All right, reviews are super important and help this podcast get discovered by other people. So number three, leave a review on the podcast. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next episode.